خبرگزاری رویتر، واشنگتن. در جلسه استماع کمیته روابط خارجی مجلس نمایندگان در کنگره آمریکا در روز 7 ژوئیه 2011 در واشنگتن، ندا الهام زنجانپور از طریق اینترنت در مورد جراحاتی که وی در اثر حمله‌ای با نارنجک توسط نیروهای امنیتی عراق به اشرف متحمل شده است، در خلال اجلاس استماع کمیته روابط خارجی در پایتخت شهادت می‌دهد. بر اساس اولین تحقیقات سازمان ملل متحد در ماه آوریل، این کمپ که محل استقرار یک گروه اپوزیسیون ایرانی است، شاهد درگیری‌های نیروهای امنیتی عراقی با ساکنان بود که طی آن 34 تن از ساکنان کشته شدند. رویتر، واشنگتن. دینا روی راباکر، نماینده جمهوریخواه مجلس نمایندگان آمریکا از کالیفرنیا، و راس کارنهان، نماینده دموکرات از میسوری، در روز 7 ژوئیه 2011 در واشنگتن در حال برگزاری جلسه استماع کمیته روابط خارجی در ارتباط با خشونت‌های انجام شده علیه ساکنان اشرف در عراق هستند. رویتر، واشنگتن. اعضای شهود پنل در استماع کمیته خارجی کنگره به شهادت ندا الهام زنجانپور از طریق اینترنت در مورد جراحاتی که وی در اثر حمله با نارنجک توسط نیروهای امنیتی در کمپ اشرف در عراق متحمل شده، در خلال جلسه استماع کمیته روابط خارجی در پایتخت آمریکا در 7 ژوئیه گوش فرا می‌دهند. رویتر. دخی زنجانپور، سمت چپ، در حال گوش دادن به شهادت دخترش الهام در خلال استماعی در کمیته روابط خارجی در واشنگتن در 7 ژوئیه 2011 دیده می شود که از طریق اینترنت در مورد جراحات خود در اثر حمله با نارنجک توسط نیروهای امنیتی عراق در کمپ اشرف در عراق متحمل شده است. رویتر. خانواده های ساکنان کمپ اشرف اشکهای خود را هنگام دیدن ویدئوی خشونت ها توسط نیروهای امنیتی عراق پاک می کنند. بر اساس تحقیقات اولیه سازمان ملل متحد در ماه آوریل، این کمپ که محل استقرار یک گروه اپوزیسیون ایرانی است، شاهد درگیری های نیروهای امنیتی عراقی با ساکنان بود که طی آن 34 تن از ساکنان کشته شدند. رویتر. سرهنگ وسلی مارتین از ارتش آمریکا در خلال استماع در کمیته روابط خارجی کنگره در مورد خشونت علیه ساکنان کمپ اشرف در عراق در واشنگتن در 7 ژوئیه 2011 شهادت می‌دهد. رویتر. سرهنگ دکتر گری مورش، رئیس همدلی بین‌المللی، روز 7 ژوئیه 2011 در واشنگتن در جلسه استماع کمیته روابط خارجی در ارتباط با خشونت‌های انجام شده علیه ساکنان کمپ اشرف در عراق شهادت می‌دهد. رویتر، واشنگتن. دادستان کل قاضی مایکل موکیزی در خلال استماع در کمیته روابط خارجی کنگره در مورد خشونت علیه ساکنان اشرف در واشنگتن پایتخت آمریکا در 7 ژوئیه 2011 شهادت می‌دهد. کنگره آمریکا کمیته روابط خارجی، کنترل و تحقیقات. قتل عام در اشرف، الزام‌ها برای سیاست آمریکا.
قتل عام در اشرف، الزام‌ها برای سیاست آمریکا عنوان یک جلسه استماع تاریخی و طولانی در کنگره آمریکاست که روز 7 ژوئیه 2011 16 تیر ماه 1390 از سوی کمیته تحقیقات و نظارت بر اعمال دولت در کمیته روابط خارجی مجلس نمایندگان ایالات متحده برگزار شد. ریاست این اجلاس استماع را دانا روهراباکر، رئیس کمیته تحقیقات و نظارت بر عهده داشت که چندی پیش در رأس هیئتی دو حزبی از کنگره برای دیدار از اشرف و شنیدن شهادت‌های مجاهدان اشرف به عراق سفر کرد. اما نوری مالکی در دیداری که با وی و هیئت کنگره آمریکا داشت، شخصاً با دیدار هیئت کنگره از اشرف مخالفت کرد و هیئت کنگره طی کنفرانسی در سفارت آمریکا در بغداد ضمن افشای این ممانعت غیر قابل قبول بر ادامه کار تحقیقات و برگزاری جلسات استماع در کنگره تأکید کرد. در اجلاس استماع کنگره که با حضور برجسته‌ترین نمایندگان مردم آمریکا از هر دو حزب، اعضای خانواده‌های مجاهدان اشرف در آمریکا و با شهادت ندا الهام زنجانی از اشرف و همچنین شهودی چون وزیر مایکل موکیزی، دادستان کل آمریکا در دولت قبلی ایالات متحده، و نیز سرهنگ وسلی مارتین و سرهنگ دکتر گری مورش که هر دو در مأموریت‌های فرماندهی حفاظت از اشرف و امداد پزشکی در بیمارستان اشرف شرکت داشته و با مجاهدان اشرف کار کرده اند، به ادای شهادت پرداختند. اما نماینده وزارت خارجه آمریکا علیرغم اعلام قبلی برای ادای شهادت در جلسه استماع کنگره شرکت نکرد. نمایندگان کنگره این غیبت را به حساب ترس وزارت خارجه از حساب پس دادن درباره کشتار و اذیت و آزار مجاهدان اشرف تفسیر کردند. غیبت نماینده وزارت خارجه باعث شد که برخی نمایندگان در این باره سوال مکتوب برای این وزارتخانه ارسال کنند و رئیس اجلاس دانا روهراباکر ضمن اعلام رسمی ارسال سوالات برای پاسخگویی وزارت خارجه در مورد شرکت نکردن نماینده این وزارتخانه هشدار داد: به ما گفته شد که هیچ کس نیست که امروز در این استماع شرکت کند. چقدر ساده! این دست به سر کردن تا جایی قابل ادامه دادن است، ولی از آن به بعد به لاپوشانی تبدیل می شود. بله، اقدامات غیرقانونی نه تنها از سوی دولت عراق که مرتکب قتل عام شد، بلکه تسلیم شدن از جانب مقامات ایالات متحده در این جنایت هم بخشی از ماجراست. پوشاندن خلافکاری غیر قانونی است. شایان توجه است که در غیبت نماینده وزارت خارجه شخصی به نام رضا ری تکیه به عنوان برگ فشار رژیم آخوندی در جلسه استماع در شمار شهود شرکت کرده بود. وی که از مدافعان شناخته شده انتخابات فرمایشی و قلابی دیکتاتوری آخوندی و اصلاح طلبان قلابی در رژیم ولایت فقیه است، در شهادتنامه و اظهاراتش به تکرار دعاوی رژیم و لابی آن در آمریکا علیه مجاهدین پرداخت. اما در برابر استدلالات متقن حقوقی و سیاسی نمایندگان کنگره و شهادت‌های تکان دهنده شهود، حتی وی نیز تصریح کرد که خشونت با اعضای کمپ اشرف را محکوم می‌کنم. توجه شما را به گزارشی مشروع از اجلاس استماع در کنگره آمریکا جلب می‌کنیم.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will be opening this hearing in a few moments. However, prior to the official hearing, we will have a very short briefing session, which you are all permitted to join us in observing, and the briefing session will be via satellite television. And so we will now proceed with this briefing, which will then be followed by the official hearing of this subcommittee. And I'm Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, Chairman of the Subcommittee on Investigation Oversight. In the early hours of Friday, April 8th, units of the Iraqi Army, numbering about 2,500 and including armored vehicles, assaulted Iranian civilians at Camp Ashraf, murdering at least 34 residents and wounding hundreds more. These were unarmed people being shot down by full-time professional, well-armed troops. I believe this was an atrocity, a massacre, perhaps a crime against humanity. We have a brief video clip of footage taken during the latest Iraqi military raid on Camp Ashraf. I apologize if some of the images are unpleasant, but I believe that it is important that we come to grips with reality on what is actually happening on the ground. Following that, one of the civilians who was wounded in the attack, a young lady named Ilham Nadu Zanjarpour, will brief us by video conference from Camp Ashraf in Iraq. Nada is a Canadian citizen and has lived in Camp Ashraf since 1999. Her mother is with us today, and we welcome her mother. And if you would, today, thank you very much. So if we could start first with the video clip, we will proceed. And I think it's Ilham Nadu Zanjarpour. Can you hear us?
Yes, hello.
Well, we see that you are recovering now. Could you describe for us, was there anything going on in Camp Ashraf that would have threatened the people of Iraq to the point that it would have justified an army coming into the camp?
Camp Ashraf is a residential area where 3,400 Iranians, just like myself, live. We've been in Camp Ashraf for 25 years. We've had a long time history of friends with the Iraqi people. It's a residential area with school, with a mosque. It's a residential area where people live. It's not a threat to the Iraqi army at all.
And could you describe for us what you personally saw during this attack?
It was about 7 in the morning when I heard gunshots, explosions. I went to one of the main streets and I suddenly saw Iraqi forces who had entered Camp Ashraf by force. They had entered with their tanks, their Humvees. They had snipers, grenade launchers, and Iraqi forces came in and started shooting. I personally, I was there. I asked them, "What are you doing? Why are you here?" And it was then that I was targeted by Iraqi man who threw a grenade, which exploded between my legs. It destroyed the muscles in both of my legs, as you saw in the video prior to I'm speaking. It destroyed the muscles in my arms. Right now, my left arm, the nerves and tendon is destroyed, is damaged. My right arm, the muscles were torn apart. Right now, my left wrist is broken, also a part of my hand. My right elbow is also broken. And these are the shells, parts of the shells that was taken out from my legs and arms due to the grenade explosion. During the attack, Iraqi forces specifically would target one of the civilians. For example, he would say, "Look over there," and shoot. We were defenseless. We had no arms. We had nothing. We were defenseless. They opened fire and killed 36 Ashraf residents and wounded hundreds.
Did you see anyone in the camp at any time with weapons shooting at the soldiers?
No, from our Ashraf, no.
Yes.
We had no arms.
So you had no weapons whatsoever,
No.
and when the soldiers came into Camp Ashraf, they had armored vehicles. Is that correct?
The Iraqi forces came in with armored vehicles and were fully equipped.
As if they were fighting a other military unit, but instead they were up against unarmed civilians.
Yes, exactly.
Mr. Carnahan, do you have any questions to ask our briefer today? Yes, just right there.
Hi, this is Congressman Carnahan, and thank you for speaking with us today, and we hope your wounds heal up, and thank you for sharing your story and the story of the residents at the camp. It's important that we get to the bottom of what happened there. Can you tell me, prior to this incident, had there been other violence at the camp?
Yes, first of all, I thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on behalf of the 3,400 Camp Ashraf residents, specifically the 1,000 there. It's a great honor. yes, from 2009, since the Iraqi forces took over Ashraf's protection, violence from the Iraqi forces started. We had a previous attack in 2009 where 11 people were killed, also hundreds wounded. From the time that UNAMI stepped out of Ashraf, the Iraqi forces openly attacked us, and it continued until the last attack. And right up until now, there's no guarantee that they won't do another attack. They won't carry out another attack against us.
One last question. Can you tell us that earlier attack and the most recent attack, can you give us your best assessment of what set those attacks off?
Well, first, I'm sure you know that Khamenei, the Iranian regime's supreme leader, signed an agreement with Maliki as to close up Ashraf and to annihilate Ashraf residents. I can say that's the best thing. That's the best thing that I could say. But the Iraqi army, under the command of Maliki, carried out this attack.
Thank you very much.
We have with us a noted judge from Texas who is a member of this committee now and a member of Congress, and he has presided over many criminal trials, and would like to hear perhaps his questions for you at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Neda. Appreciate the opportunity to ask you a couple of questions. I'm Ted Poe from Texas. Let me ask you, first of all, the 36 that were murdered. We heard reports that rather than complying with appropriate burial procedures, it took many days, maybe weeks, before permission was granted to bury the 36 that were murdered by the Iraqi forces. Can you shed some light on the burial, and were those burials permitted to be done according to procedures that you follow, or were they hampered by the Iraqi government?
Yes, we have a cemetery that is located in the northern part of the camp. Right now, that's the part where the Iraqi forces in their attack took the cemetery. And the Iraqi government prohibited us from burying the 36 who were killed in this attack for over, I think, a month and a half. They didn't allow us, they didn't agree with us to bury them. They delayed giving. They delayed giving us the bodies, and just didn't allow us to bury the dead in our own cemetery.
And do you know why?
I think it was just another order under Maliki's government. Perhaps they were, I don't know, they wanted the land under the pretext of having the land. I don't know.
I have one more question. The Iraqi government wants Camp Ashraf moved to another location. The Iranian government probably does as well. What would happen to the safety to the residents of Camp Ashraf if you were moved to some other location in Iraq?
Well, first of all, it's illegal for the Iraqi government to want such a thing, because under international law we cannot be transferred, expelled, or displaced to any other location, either inside Iraq or outside Iraq, against our own will. As we are protected persons under the 4th Geneva Convention, and we have signed an agreement with the U.S. forces in 2004, the responsibility for Ashraf residents until the final displacement is with the U.S. forces. Now, the issue about moving us to another part of Iraq, perhaps far from the border, this is just another pretext of another crime. Moving us somewhere far from the border, where we are far from international spotlight, is just like asking us to go to a concentration camp. And just allow me to say that this is to the demands of the Iranian regime. This is what the Iranian regime exactly wants. And we will never surrender to such a demand, to go to a concentration camp and be murdered far from international spotlight.
So would that jeopardize your safety?
Yes,
if you were
definitely.
moved to another location in Iraq?
Yes, definitely.
That jeopardizes safety?
Yes, definitely, because there is no guarantee that we have protection. If there is no if the U.S. forces cannot protect us, then we're going directly into the concentration camp at the will of the Iranian regime. And it's unacceptable.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank you very much for sharing your story with us and the story of Camp Ashraf and this brutal massacre that took place. We appreciate, and Mr. Filner, do you have a couple of questions? I didn't see you over there, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say thank you for holding this hearing, allowing me to participate as a member of Congress. As you are well aware, because you have been there, there is a potentially much greater humanitarian disaster awaiting. And I think the United States has both the legal and the moral obligation to try to prevent that. And I thank you for holding this to put the spotlight. Too few Americans know what is going on there. And we thank you and Ashraf for testifying this morning. We all met your mom. She sends her love, obviously, and her concern mirrors that of millions of people in this country. So thank you for what you said. I just wanted to ask, by the way, did you or anybody at Ashraf try to get the Americans to respond to this attack that the Iraqis carried out?
Yes. Before I answer your question, excuse me, please, I say hello to my mother. I'm very happy that she's there. Hopefully I'll be able to speak to her soon. About the question that you asked, yes, I personally, through the Canadian consulate, asked to be transferred to Balad Hospital to receive better care. The Canadian consulate told me that they didn't accept. Also, through our liaison officer, we asked the American Embassy as well, but again, we were denied. I asked them for myself as well as for all of the other injured, because I'm sure you know there were about 340 injured, about 245 were shot or received injuries just like myself through a grenade explosion. From the beginning, we really needed medical attention, but unfortunately they didn't accept to take us. However, they came to visit. They took 7 Ashraf residents, and you must understand that 7 out of 340 is a very, very low number. yes, we asked for their help.
Did the Americans, did you ask them for help as the attack was occurring?
Oh, yes.
For some military intervention or some military protection as was promised and agreed to and signed by the American Army?
Yes, but from every moment we had contact with the United States forces, with the embassy. In fact, from April 3rd, the U.S. forces were here inside Ashraf because we saw the tanks that had entered, and we informed them that something is going to go on. We have to prevent it. But unfortunately, on April 7th, 9:20 p.m., Lieutenant Colonel Molinari, his unit was ordered out of the camp. That left us completely defenseless vis-a-vis the massive assault by Iraqi forces.
You know, this is very disheartening, especially, I think, Mr. Chairman, in this room, the Secretary of State a few months ago promised to protect the health and safety of the people in Camp Ashraf, and apparently that did not occur. And I think this Congress, with your leadership, needs to say more about that. We thank you. We're looking forward to your recovery, and we will do our best here in Congress to make sure that you are not forcibly dispersed, and that there is some protection for you in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Filner, who has been very active over this last several years in paying attention to the potential danger that the people of Camp Ashraf has lived with as part of their life for far too long. I want to thank the young lady today for sharing with us your story. The visualization of you there just adds total credence to the harm and the suffering that the people of Camp Ashraf have to face and are having to go through, and has been inflicted upon them in an intentional way. So thank you very much, and we're very grateful for your courage in being on this briefing today, because we know that you're fully aware that other people may view you then as an enemy, and you may be putting yourself in jeopardy again. But let me just note for the record, if anything would happen to this briefer, all hell would break loose in Washington, D.C., and this young lady is courageous, and we must stand beside her, and we do. So if anybody has anything in mind about shutting her up, they're going to have to deal with us in a unified way. So thank you very much. We're with you. We're very pleased your mother was with us, and I know she is very proud to have such a courageous daughter. I have two daughters at home, and I hope when they grow up that they're as courageous as you are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Please, I just wanted to add one more thing. I'm sure you understand that we are still worried about future attacks, of what's going to happen, and I really appreciate members of Congress, the support of the American people, especially yourself, Chairman Rohrabacher, as well as other members of the subcommittee, Ranking Member Kongereh, for all that you're doing right now. I just wanted to, if you allow me, just to say one more thing about the 300 loudspeakers that are placed around Ashraf by the Iranian regime with the help of the Iraqi government. They blare profanity, vulgar threats against the woman 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It starts from 4:30 in the morning, continues until 2, 3 a.m. So all around, all of us, perhaps even in the clinic here, or residents, have 1 or 2 hours a day. And this is also what I thank Judge Poe and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee's efforts for stopping this. Other than that, I'm very, very grateful for all that you are doing. I thank you on behalf of 3,400 Ashraf residents, and I hope and I understand that it's, I know that you understand that it's very essential that we have a United Nations monitoring team based in Ashraf so that our protection is provided and that another attack does not occur. And thank you very, very much. Thank you for giving me this time, and I send you all the regards of Ashraf, all Ashraf residents. Thank you.
All right. God bless. We will now officially go into the hearing of this subcommittee. I call this hearing of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs Committee to open, and I will be having opening remarks. We will then have short opening remarks from members of the committee, and then we will go to our panel of witnesses. And I'm Congressman Dana Rohrabacher. I welcome you to this hearing. And as we move from the briefing on the April attack, it should be noted that Camp Ashraf has, for more than 20 years, been the home of 3,400 members of the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, that's MEK, a key opposition group working against the radical Islamic Iranian dictatorship. Read that. The 3,400 members of or residents of Camp Ashraf are declared enemies of the mullah dictatorship in Iran, which is a very significant fact to keep in mind when paying attention to try to figure out what's going on. Camp Ashraf residents were promised protection under the 4th Geneva Convention by senior U.S. commanders in the aftermath of the liberation of Iraq as we kicked out Saddam Hussein. Sovereignty was turned over to the Baghdad government in 2004, and with it, the transfer of responsibility for Camp Ashraf. When our congressional delegation discussed this situation with Iraq's Prime Minister Maliki in Baghdad last month, the authority to govern, his authority to govern, and the sovereignty of the people of Iraq over their territory was not an issue. We in no way quarreled with that. How the Iraqi government exercises its authority, however, is a matter of grave concern. The use of excessive force, murder, massacres, and other such tactics is an illegitimate use of force on the face of it. What happened on April 8th was an excessive use of force. It was an illegitimate use of power on its face. Using troops and armored vehicles against unarmed civilians conjures up memories of Tiananmen Square in communist China, not the kind of democratic rule that Americans have fought so long and hard, that we have dedicated such of our own blood and treasure to try to create a more democratic society. It certainly isn't reflected in what happened at Camp Ashraf on April 8th. The wholesale murder of unarmed refugees simply cannot be ignored. After the attack, the State Department asserted that the, quote, crisis and loss of life was initiated by the government of Iraq and the Iraqi military, end of quote. But what about before the attack? Was the U.S. Embassy or the commander of U.S. forces in Iraq notified of the Iraqi military buildup outside the camp or of their intentions? Was the Iraqi government contacted? Did they contact us? If so, what was the response? What response did we give them? And what was the Iraqi response if we questioned them? Why was a United States unit deployed at Camp Ashraf ordered away just hours before the attack? We would like to have asked the State Department these questions. We'd have liked them to have had a witness here, an official that could have talked to us about this and been on the record in answering these important questions. But we were told that no one was available to testify today at this hearing. How convenient. This stonewalling can only go so far before it becomes a cover-up. And yes, illegalities, not just of the Iraqi military, who murdered civilians, who committed a massacre, but of the acquiescence by the United States and United States officials in this crime is part of the story. Covering up wrongdoing is itself illegal. A second issue of concern is whether the Maliki government acted in concert with the Iranian dictatorship. Prime Minister Maliki's political party is based on support from the Shiite community of Iraq. And, of course, the Shiite community of Iraq has, in some kind, a mutual relationship with the Shiite mullah dictatorship in Tehran. Maliki's majority in the parliament depends on the political bloc that's controlled by Mr. al-Sadr, an open agent of Tehran, and whose Mahdi militia has often clashed with U.S. forces. Is the Camp Ashraf massacre a signal of even a larger problem? Is this something that has resulted in the fact that we are seeing a willingness on the part of the government of Iraq, of Prime Minister Maliki and his majority, to do the bidding of the mullah dictatorship next door? Well, if something like that is happening, and this is the reason why Iraqi military forces felt compelled to go into Camp Ashraf and massacre its residents, maybe this calls into question the entire purpose of America's involvement in Iraq to begin with. Has America spent its blood and treasure only to allow a government to come to power in Baghdad that is a puppet of the Iranian mullah dictatorship? In 1997, Iran and the State Department persuaded the Clinton administration to put the MEK on the foreign terrorist list, or foreign terrorist organization list. This naive gesture was supposed to improve relations. But we know that relations did not improve with Tehran because Tehran continued to support violence and terrorism across the region and crush dissidents at home and develop nuclear weapons. So certainly putting the people of Camp Ashraf on the terrorist list certainly didn't do any good, even if it was dishonest and in its intent to begin with. The MEK, however, remains on the terrorist list, even though it's clear the mullahs didn't start coming around and becoming more, acceptable in their behavior. The United Kingdom and the European Union have removed the MEK from terrorist lists. So we should quit playing games and also remove the MEK from terrorist lists before it results in another massacre, which is one thing that needs to be answered. Did the fact that the United States government maintain the MEK on a terrorist list in any way contribute to the string of decisions that led to the massacre of 34 innocent people, as well as the wounding of hundreds more? Now, we have learned much. We have much to learn today. What really happened on April 8th? Can we continue to protect Camp Ashraf? What is the solution? Should the residents be relocated to safe areas outside of Iraq? What is the solution? That's an interesting question for us to talk about today as well. I would be interested in hearing suggestions from the panel that we are about to happen. And one last point before we turn it over to Congressman Kongereh for his opening statement. I believe I read in a paper that 34 people were killed just a day or two ago from bombs that went off in Iraq. And it's very easy to think that those 34 people, people are still being killed. Why are we concerned about Camp Ashraf when you have other people being killed in these terrorist attacks? Well, let me note, it is not equal when a terrorist plants a bomb and kills innocent people. It is not equal to when a government exercising its sovereign authority decides in a willful way to massacre people and kill them, even though the numbers are the same. A government is expected to be responsible and to act legally and lawfully. A terrorist group, you will expect them to be the dregs of society and of the earth. Let us hope that the Maliki government understands that there is a difference between terrorist activities, which are unacceptable, and the activities of his government, which are totally inconsistent with law and civilization. So, government troops to be openly killing people, as we just saw, is unacceptable anywhere in the civilized world, and that is a lot different than a terrorist attack. So we have a moral obligation today as people to call people to task and to find out exactly what happened. Mr. Kongereh, do you have an opening statement?
Yes, I do, and I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing today and for shining a bright light on this issue. Also for leading our delegation recently to Iraq to meet with Prime Minister Maliki and officials there, as well as our own U.S. government officials, to really help get to the bottom of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would ask Congressman Poe to take over the chair. I've been called to the floor. I have an amendment on the floor that I have to take care of. I will be returning very shortly as soon as we do business. And Mr. Poe, could you take over the chair? And I'm sure you have an opening statement as well.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and also want to recognize my colleague, Mr. Poe from Texas, who is also in our delegation, for his commitment on this issue as well. In light of recent events, our trip to Iraq and the scheduled departure of U.S. military this December, this hearing is especially timely for us to assess not only the humanitarian situation at Camp Ashraf, but also to consider the broader issues of U.S.-Iraq policy. I'd also like to note that several Missourians are here today, including Mrs. Azam Shayari. We're happy to have you here, whose son is currently at Camp Ashraf. I want to thank you all for being here and for your insight on these issues. The history of the MEK and Camp Ashraf is one that dates back several decades. During our trip to Iraq last month, we met with numerous people regarding the slaughter at Camp Ashraf on April 8th. Not surprisingly, we heard a lot of different and conflicting stories. What is not in dispute is that over 30 Camp Ashraf residents were killed, over 300 wounded by Iraqi security forces. These killings have been widely condemned, and I concur. In the week following the killings, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights called for, quote, a full, independent, and transparent inquiry, and further added, quote, any person found responsible for the use of excessive force should be prosecuted. Again, I concur. A full, fair, and independent investigation will provide for the best means of finding
a final determination of what happened and will allow anyone found responsible to be brought to justice and help prevent future attacks. I look forward to hearing the insights of the witnesses here today regarding the human rights abuses, but also how we protect from future abuses. In 2003, the residents of Camp Ashraf had protected status under the Geneva Convention, and pursuant to the Status as a Forces Agreement between the U.S. and Iraqi governments, jurisdiction of the camp has been under Iraqi jurisdiction since 2009. With the drawdown of U.S. forces in Iraq, I believe that the UN or other independent body be given access to the camp to assess the humanitarian situation there. I'd also like to have the panel address the issues with regard to relocation of the residents. Is that an option or is it not? And also to look at the broader implications to U.S. policy as we shift from military to a State Department-led effort focusing on diplomacy and development. With that, I'm going to submit the balance of my opening for the record so we can shift our time for the witnesses. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Appreciate the ranking member's comments, and likewise I was with Chairman Rohrbacher and the ranking member on our trip to Iraq on June the 11th. We did visit with Maliki, discussed many issues with him, and one of those issues was we wanted to go to Camp Ashraf and get the resident side of what happened to them and the camp in April. After almost 2 hours of talking, and a lot of talk, as the statement has sometimes been said, when all is said and done, more is said than done, we were not allowed to go to Camp Ashraf. He was adamant about that, and we respected his decision since he was in charge of the nation. But my question then and now is still the same. Why not? What did Maliki have to hide? If he was right about his position, and he articulated his position, I thought, quite well, why couldn't he be open-minded enough to let us get the viewpoint from the residents that lived in Camp Ashraf? And he denied us that access to those people. So it seems to me he had plenty to hide, is the reason we weren't allowed to go to Camp Ashraf and hear from the residents. When the Iraqi soldiers stormed Camp Ashraf on April the 8th, fired at the residents and ran them over with American Humvees, 36 were killed, including women and children. It was a human rights atrocity, and the U.S., with thousands of troops still fighting for peace in Iraq, has done more than little more than issue just a statement. It's not conducted its own investigation, hasn't asked the UN to investigate, and there is no point in the Iraqi government investigating the attack because they are the ones who ordered the attack. They certainly are going to find no fault with the action of their own military. A week after the attack, a letter with 18 members of the House to Secretary Clinton and Secretary Gates asking them to shed some light on this violent attack. It is now July. To date, there is blissful silence from the administration and have given us no answer for this inhumane attack of Iraq on the people of Iraq. I guess they are too busy bombing Libya in the name of humanity to get back with us. Instead, the administration has proposed a new relocation plan for the camp. They want to move the camp to some other location within Iraq. This is the same plan the Iranians themselves proposed years ago. We have heard how dangerous this would be to the residents of the camp. In May, I sent a letter to Secretary Clinton opposing this misguided plan. Camp Ashraf is recognized around the world as a refuge for those who oppose the Iranian regime. And if we move it within Iraq, they will lose that public recognition while leaving residents under the same control of the Army. There's something directly under our control that we can do, and that is we can take the MEK off the foreign terrorist organization list. One of the obstacles in moving Camp Ashraf to a peaceful third country is that they are still designated as terrorists by the United States. I've introduced a bipartisan legislation, HRES 60, that urges the Secretary of State to take the MEK off the Foreign Terrorist Organization list. I have seen and been in all the classified briefings that I know of regarding the MEK, and I am not convinced that they should remain on the list. The State Department has not made their case to keep them on the list, therefore they should be removed. The MEK should not be used as a political tool to appease any dictators in the world. 83 of my colleagues agree with me. As a nation, we've promised to protect these Iranian individuals. No matter what we think of the MEK, we should all agree that no group, especially one that has given up terrorism and given up all of its weapons, deserves to have its human rights trampled on by Iraq or Iran or anyone else. We have given Iraq a democracy and freedom. It's time they start acting like they deserve it and provide safety for Camp Ashraf residents and the MEK. And I will yield to the gentleman, Mr. Filner, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe I need I would like an unanimous consent that I be allowed to officially sit here as a member of the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your courage and activism on this issue also. You know, I was reading the testimony, Mr. Chairman, of our panelists in advance just to be prepared, and I noticed one of the panelists spends his whole time discrediting or trying to discredit the MEK. I wish, almost as if to justify the massacre that occurred at Camp Ashraf, I wish he had spent as much time undermining the regime of Iran. We'd be better off. I don't know about you, Mr. Chairman, but I have tried to look at the resistance going on inside. The MEK and its leader has come up with, it seems to me, the one legitimate policy that is best for us as Americans. They call it the third way. That means we do not invade Iran, but we do not appease the existing mullahs. We get out of the way and let the resistance do what it can and should and wants to. The listing of as the MEK as a terrorist organization is getting in the way, so we ought to delist. And there's lots of reasons, as you pointed out, why we should. I was recently at a conference or at a rally in Paris. Judge Mukasey was there, where the first Homeland Security Secretary unequivocally said that MEK was not a terrorist organization. I mean, nothing crossed his desk as the chairman, as the Secretary of Homeland Security that indicated that in the years that he was in that position. So I think we ought to look seriously, and besides, it's not even an issue. It should be for us whatever the ideology is, and we can talk about that. There was a massacre. We should have prevented it. We have a legal obligation to have prevented it. We should have done. We should do it in the future. And you know, I can't worry about human rights, the ideology when there's human rights violations going on. Although I think it's a red, if I may say, a red herring. So I think, and I appreciate your efforts, Mr. Rohrbacher's efforts, Mr. Kongereh's efforts to make America more aware of this. This is going to hit us, Mr. Poe, I think you know. As the American pullout occurs of Iraq, after all our treasure of money and men and women who have died and been injured there, do we want the Iranians to take over? And yet that is a potential. Ashraf is a symbol of what we, I think, need to prevent. After all this intervention in Iraq in a decade, the Iranians come in. The MEK favors a non-nuclear, democratic, secular regime. I think that's something we can all agree to. And we look forward to testimony. Thank you, Mr. Pope.
Does the gentlelady from Texas have a brief opening statement?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your courtesies. Let me acknowledge the witnesses, and I get a special opportunity to acknowledge General McCasey. We were together before and didn't have the opportunity to do so. I do want to acknowledge as well, Mr. Chairman, in receiving a letter to my letter that I had written regarding the involvement of the United States in this effort to resolve this terrible crisis, and I do think it should be acknowledged, and that is a letter from Joseph McManus, who wrote on behalf of the State Department of the United States interests. So let me just say that nowhere should we tolerate the heinousness of the attack on the residents of Camp Ashraf, and no matter how deep the friendship is or the recovering history of Iraq, it should not be tolerated. And as well, we should not allow Iran to dominate and to violently infuse into the response to Camp Ashraf actions that they would carry out themselves. And if the actions were carried out by the military in Iraq, they are as culpable as those who have either instructed or created the atmosphere. So I hope as we find a solution, that it will be a solution where we demand of the head of government of Iraq to cease and desist and to collaborate and cooperate with safe passage for those in the camp, medical care, and the extreme violation of human rights and civil rights should be completely denounced, but more importantly, the world organizations, including the United Nations, should immediately denounce this behavior, and Iraq should pay a penalty in the World Forum for the treatment not only of those in Camp Ashraf, but in many citizens of their own who are in diverse backgrounds. So I thank you for holding this hearing, Mr. Chairman. It is frustrating to come back time after time with continuous violence and no response by Iraq. And I hope if the ambassador of Iraq, I don't see that person as a witness on this august body, but if the ambassador of Iraq can hear my voice, he needs to come to Congress. He owes this Congress an apology. He needs and owes this country an explanation as to why he is, in essence, violating the civil rights of a minority group in his country when we fought and shed blood so that Iraqis might live free. He owes both an apology to the people in Camp Ashraf, to the people of Iraq who will suffer as well because they are diverse, and he owes an apology and explanation to the world family, and particularly the United States of America, for the treasure that we lost attempting to provide democracy there. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Judge McCuskey, we will hear from you first. There is a 5-minute time limit on each of your comments, so if you want to go longer than that, you can submit it to the record. So first, Judge McCuskey.
Thank you. I want to thank the chairman, the ranking member Kongereh, Judge Poe, Representative Filner, and Representative Jackson Lee for allowing me to testify at this important hearing on the events in Camp Ashraf in April of this year that involved the murder of some 36 innocents by Iraqi forces who were using weapons and vehicles that were actually supplied to them by the United States. I've submitted 7 pages of written testimony making several recommendations of what I would hope this committee would do and could do to try to determine how this massacre came to be and what can be done to prevent conditions at Ashraf from deteriorating it even further. And I thank the subcommittee for making those a part of the record. But I know that the chair of this committee and others have had direct experience with the Iraqi government insofar as Ashraf is concerned, and know a great deal more about that subject than I do. And so I want to focus my oral testimony today on what the United States has done in the past, some of which has helped, but some of which has hurt, and what it can do in the future to prevent people from being murdered. Because make no mistake about it, what we're talking about here literally is a matter of life and death. Back in 2003, when the multinational force went into Iraq, the residents of Ashraf surrendered the weapons they could have used to defend themselves and put themselves in the hands of the multinational force, and principally the hands of American forces. They received a written guarantee from an American general that I attached to my written testimony that they would be treated as protected persons under the Fourth Geneva Convention. In 2009, General Petraeus signed off on the Iraqi government's assumption of control over the entirety of the country, including the vicinity of Ashraf, only after he got written and oral assurances that the people living in Ashraf will be protected by Iraqi forces. And as we know, those assurances have been violated repeatedly with the results that we've seen here today. I should mention that at both times, both in July of 2009 and April of 2011, when these attacks took place, our Secretary of Defense was in country. It would be hard to imagine a more calculated slap at this country than that. And when you think about the terrible price that we've paid to liberate Iraq, the lengths to which we've gone to oppose the Iranian government, when you think of the opposition to the Iranian government in the Gulf and elsewhere, and the strategic defeat that Iran suffered when it overreached in Bahrain, you wonder what has made Iran and Iraq so bold as to act in this way. Well, I would suggest to you that what enables them and what emboldens them is, as the chairman suggested, that the United States, and in particular the State Department, has kept the MEK on a list of foreign terrorist organizations, something the European Union and the UK have long since stopped doing, and thereby legitimized the behavior of both Iraq and Iran. The State Department seems infected with the idea that it must not do anything that might displease the Iranians, even when doing so, in fact, would give the United States more leverage against the Iranians, not less. The MEK, as many of you know, went to court to get this unjustified designation removed. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals told the State Department that they had not presented evidence that MEK has committed violence in the last 10 years or has the ability or the inclination to do so now. And it directed the State Department in September 2010 to review and to reconsider that designation. Well, that was almost a year ago, and all the State Department has done in that time is to come forward with documents that do not deal with any issue relevant to the designation, and to ask MEK questions which it has answered that are not relevant to the designation. It is long since time for the State Department to stop this policy of delay, which simply emboldens murderers. I urge the committee to hold a hearing at which the State Department is required to justify its policy or to change it, and at which this committee inquires also into what our government is doing to enforce the Leahy Amendment that bars both military and civilian aid from this country to military units like the Iraqi units that murdered Ashraf residents. If you ask the tough questions, perhaps we'll get answers that we and the residents of Ashraf can live with. And I thank you very much for your attention and for hearing me.
Thank you, Judge McCasey. Colonel Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, for this opportunity to speak before the committee. Mr. Chairman, I would also like to introduce the courting disaster. It's the rebuttal to the RAND report on the MEK, sir.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. As the Anti-Terrorism Force Protection Officer for all of Iraq and as the J3 for detention operations and the base commander of Camp Ashraf, I'd like to make one point up front. The MEK is not a terrorist organization. In 2003, as the United States finalized its invasion plans, the Iranian government set to work how to quietly take over as much of Iraq as possible. Today, the Iranian influence expanded itself over the southern provinces, throughout Baghdad, and into Diyala province, where Camp Ashraf and the MEK is now located. Iran's growing influence in the region is in keeping with Ayatollah Khomeini's statement, the road to Jerusalem is through Kabbalah. As the Maliki and Ahmadinejad governments grow closer, the situation of the MEK becomes more critical, as evidenced in the film footage of July 2009 and April 2011. In these videos, we observe Maliki's forces using U.S.-supplied vehicles and equipment to run down and shoot defenseless people. We witness the courage of the residents of Ashraf. Despite knowing they may be the next to die, they rush to the rescue of their fallen comrades. Courage under fire is an admirable trait. Killing unarmed people is murder. Yet the U.S. State Department has done nothing of substance to address these attacks or the entire Ashraf situation. As for the State Department, the action officer provided to handle Camp Ashraf issues during my tenure was a never-ending story of embarrassment and prejudice. Her visits were disasters. Her continual rumors and misinformation resulted in my frequent unannounced and unfounded inspections into MEK compounds. Despite warnings to all of us from the Commanding General of Task Force 134 not to provide the untrustworthy Iraqi National Security Advisor, Roubier, information, she continued to do so. In turn, Roubier would pass it on to the Iranian government. Within a couple of weeks, I would then receive the information from the MEK. Upon my return to the Pentagon, I assisted State Department officials addressing the MEK issue. This included providing a translated letter from Mr. Zubairi, head of the Kurdistan Democrat Party International Relations, stating MEK did not attack the Kurds. Mr. Zubairi subsequently confirmed the letter to be true, yet several months later, when the annual report on terrorism was released by the State Department, the accusation for attacking the Kurds remained. Upon my questioning the same State Department officials about this, I was informed they don't communicate with people who put out the annual report. One perpetual rumor worthy of specific address concerns members of the MEK being held against their will. I was able to validate through specific occurrences anyone wishing to leave has that choice. The real benefactor of the fall of the Mujahideen will be Ahmadinejad and the ruling religious fundamentalists. The fundamentalist Iranian government has always wanted the MEK to be turned over to them. If it happens, executions will be conducted to remind Iranian citizens of what happens to people who oppose the government, to break the spirit of anyone considering resistance, and to show the world what happens to those who trust their lives to the United States. The MEK surrendered to the United States military without firing a shot, turned over all their weapons, accepted consolidation at Camp Ashraf, renounced terrorism, accepted protected person status under the 4th Geneva Convention, provided the free world with crucial intelligence to include Iran's development of a nuclear weapons program, and fulfilled every limitation and requirement placed on them. The MEK has fulfilled their end. The United States comes up very short. The price of that is now being paid by the residents of Camp Ashraf. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Gary Morris. 5 minutes.
Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my remarks, with your permission, I'd like to submit for the record a letter from General James Gardner, Commanding General of MNFI, to the MEK Secretary General, dated February 16th, 2006.
Without objection, to be a part of the record.
I would like to also submit a statement by the U.S. Central Commander on the full disarmament of the MEK. This statement was released in 2003.
Without objection, it also be part of the record.
Lastly, I'd like to provide the written submission of Mr. Stephen Schneebaum, an international human rights law scholar who has written on the rights of the residents of Ashraf, and attached to this written submission are 2 legal opinions which he's also prepared on the subject.
Without objection, it's admitted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've submitted a fairly extensive prepared statement that outlines my observations. These observations are based on my direct role as the lead physician assigned to Camp Ashraf in early 2004, where I lived and worked with the residents of Ashraf on a 24/7 basis. I arrived in Iraq knowing nothing about the MEK and left Ashraf with a great knowledge and insight into the organization. As great a knowledge or insight, I believe, as any other American, or more so. Let me just say I know the MEK. Based on my observations, I'd like to express 3 simple conclusions, which I believe are indisputable. Number 1, the MEK and Ashraf are not terrorists. The European Union doesn't consider them terrorists. The French don't. The United Kingdom don't. The U.S. is the only significant country that keeps them on the terrorist list. This must change, and change immediately. Number 2, when our military forces entered Iraq in 2003, meetings were held between the MEK and U.S. officials. The MEK agreed to give up all their weapons and arms. In return for their giving up their weapons of self-defense, the U.S. promised to protect them. In fact, following an extensive investigation into all aspects of the MEK, including lengthy interviews of every resident of Ashraf, each resident of Ashraf was given a signed document guaranteeing their safety as protected persons under the Fourth Geneva Convention, with the United States promising to ensure that protection. Ladies and gentlemen, the people of Ashraf have more than upheld their side of this agreement. We have not. U.S. forces have stood by, sometimes literally filming the assaults as they were happening without intervening. Number three, finally, I have a specific recommendation on what the U.S. should do to keep its word and carry out the terms of the agreement that we made. Someone must take the responsibility for protecting Ashraf. They must take this responsibility away from the Iraqis. Under the obvious influence of Iran and Iraq intend to exterminate the MEK. The status quo is not acceptable. We must intervene. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Takei.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me. And it's a privilege to be here with my co-panelists. I have submitted a testimony for the record. I'll just highlight certain aspects of it. Mojahin Khalq, the MEK, was founded in early 1960s in Iran as there was a time of proliferation of various opposition groups against the Shah. It distinguished itself by the discursive nature of ideology that sought to mix a number of incompatible dogmas. From Shi'i Islam, they appropriated the symbols of martyrdom. From Marxism, the notion of historical development of stages. From Lenin, they embraced the importance of a vanguard party committed to mobilization of masses. And from Third World revolutionaries, they took the primacy of guerrilla warfare and violence as indispensable agents of political change. The core of MEK ideology historically has always been anti-imperialism, which have often defined as opposition to the United States interest. They opposed the Shah's regime partly because of his close association with the United States. It is this impulse that propelled MEK in the 1970s toward embracing an entire spectrum of anti-American forces ranging from the Viet Cong to PLO. Given this mission of liberating the working class and expunging the influence of predatory capitalism, the United States has traditionally been identified as a source of exploitation and abuse in MEK literature. Violence has been a hallmark of MEK's strategy for assuming power. Through much of its past, the party exalted violence as a historic expression of dissent. One of the central precepts of the party is that a dedicated vanguard challenging the authority of the state can spark a mass revolution by bravely confronting that state. Once the masses observe that the state is vulnerable to violence, then they will shed their inhibition and join the protest of sparking the revolution. Thus, the most suitable means of effecting political change has always been, to some extent, including violence. Although MEK victims have been mostly Iranians, there have been Americans and American installations also victims of MEK violence. In the early 70s, the MEK communique number 3 stressed that violence against the United States was permissible given America's suppression of legitimate revolutionary movements such as those in Palestine. The first attack came in May 1972 on the occasion of President Richard Nixon's visit to Iran. To derail that visit, MEK bombed the U.S. Information Office and targeted American companies such as General Motors and Pan American Airways. That same year, the party attempted to assassinate General Harold Price, the chief of U.S. military mission in Iran. Although General Price escaped his assassins, the MEK did tragically succeed in murdering Colonel Lewis Hawkins, the deputy chief of mission, outside his home. It must be stressed that throughout the 1970s, the MEK did have support within Iran, particularly among the intelligentsia and the working class. Its message of resistance and its record of resisting the Shah did attract substantial support. The turning point for MEK's internal fortunes in Iran seems to have been 1981, when the Islamic regime engaged in one of the most brutal acts of repression, executing vast number of opposition members, including many MEK cadre. It is at that time that the organization political infrastructure in Iran was largely subdued. However, decisions made by MEK personnel also ensured that the party would not reclaim its place of influence in Iran. As MEK went into exile, its willingness to side with Saddam's Iraq against Iran in the Iran-Iraq war disturbed its already diminishing cadre. During the 1983 meeting between Mr. Rajavi and Tariq Aziz, an alliance was forged. The MEK personnel fought alongside of the Iraqis and were used in some of the most daring missions of the war.
Given the highly nationalistic nature of the Iranian population, such act was viewed as a betrayal of homeland and not necessarily a legitimate act of opposition against an abhorrent regime. The MEK would go on to assist Saddam's regime. They were employed by him in the repression of the Sunni uprising, Shi'i uprising, in 1991. Given that fact, the MEK is given that the Shi'i community is having a leading role in Iraq, that is indeed a disturbing legacy. The question then becomes what to do with MEK members in Camp Ashraf. It would be wrong, it would be immoral to forcefully repatriate inhabitants of the camp back to Iran. Given that the Islamic Republic lacks even the basic rudiments of impartial justice, they are likely to be met with certain death. Nonetheless, the international community, under auspices of the United Nations Refugee Committees, has an obligation to the members of the MEK currently at Camp Ashraf to ensure their safety and their security. The MEK cadre cannot be repatriated back to Iran. They cannot be returned to Iran. And they seem to have a difficulty staying in Iraq. It becomes a question for international community and the United Nations to find a safe haven for the remaining members of the MEK currently in Camp Ashraf. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I am going to actually ask Mr. Filner, who is not a member of this committee, if he would like to have a few minutes of questions as I organize my thoughts on this. And Mr. Kongereh has been very active and involved in this issue. And then I will turn to Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you for your incredible personal interventions in these things. It really makes a difference in the world, in fact. What struck me from the testimony is those who've had such personal contact with Ashraf, based on their own information, their own investigations, their own witnessing, their own talking to the people, have come to the conclusion that we do not have a terrorist organization. I don't see any of us worried about all these folks here, by the way, these violent people that are about to overthrow us, have come to a conclusion that these are our allies. And so I thank you for having the courage to do that. I was struck by, as I said earlier, by Dr. Takei's, is that the right pronunciation, sir? Takei?
Yes.
Testimony. I mean, do you think there should have been a massacre given this horrible ideology of the MEK? I mean,
no.
Okay, because you don't say that anywhere.
I said I abhor the violence that happened to Camp Ashraf members.
The last so-called terrorist thing you indicate in your written thing is 1972. Let's say that's 39 years ago. I don't see anything that you have since then that would substantiate your claim of a terrorist organization. But by the way, have you ever met this cult leader that you're talking about here?
No.
Oh. I have, on several occasions.
I noticed that stare in your eyes after that.
I know. I've been brainwashed. I have met a lot of world leaders, I will tell you. And I have not met someone I could say who's as intelligent, as humorous, as humane, concerned with other people around her, as humble as Mrs. Rajavi. I don't understand. In fact, when I last met with her, it was raining in Paris, and I said, "You're a cult leader. Can't you stop this rain here?" And she proceeded then to tell me that as a most powerful member of Congress, I should be able to stop the rain. But clearly, I never saw a cult leader act like that, by the way. She's a political leader, but a very humane and humble person, a very intelligent, obviously has the support. I don't know what group could have gathered 100,000 people in one place to hear a former Attorney General speak to them, a former Secretary of Homeland Security, former Chief of Staff of President Bush, a couple Congress people. I don't know. It strikes me that if our view of the world is that Iran is one of the most troubling, to say the least, actors on the human on the planet, and they are heading toward an atomic bomb, and they are heading toward maybe a takeover of Iraq, at least in political terms, we should be doing everything we can to stop that. Barring the use right now of American forces or, you know, and yet you want to discredit one of the resistance groups. And you tell you how unimportant they are. Well, if they're so unimportant, why worry about them? I mean, I don't care what religion they are, what ideology they have. I don't care. They could even be Republicans as far as I'm concerned. These are our friends. These are our friends. And we should...
Some of them are Republicans.
we should be getting out of their way and delist them and just let them do what they can. If they're so unimportant and they're so lacking of support, so that will be proved in history. But why are we helping the Iranian regime by not helping the MEK? And that's just the way it is.
Well, thank you very much.
Dr. Takei, I don't know if you want to respond.
We're gonna give you time to answer that. Go right ahead.
Before you throw your credentials at me, I have a PhD also, by the way.
I do think we should assist the opposition movements within Iran in order to deal with the regime whose characterizations I don't dispute. There is an opposition movement in Iran. It's called the Green Movement. It features dissident clerics, it features liberal elements, it features intelligentsia, it features middle-class elements. And the groups that you're purporting, Congressman, has limited, if not any support within Iran. That's just a fact. Well, and it has...
I don't agree, but even if you're right, so what? What does that mean? We shouldn't help them because they have zero? That is, so they'll be proved. And if there's an overthrow of the mullahs and there's an election, we'll see who comes out as you know, the thing. So what?
Well, I think we share the concern about Iranian human rights.
I mean, I'm not asking for millions of dollars. I'm just saying delist them.
You can have a hearing on the delisting. What I can say to you is that this is an organization with a very discursive ideology, with very peculiarities, and also with a history of violence. I think we just disagree on.
So what?
I would suggest that we let the witness answer the question.
I never heard of PhD being so irrelevant.
I think the Congressman and I just simply disagree on this.
All right. Well, thank you very much. As I get my notes together, let us turn to Judge Poe, and we'll make sure you're briefed. Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on Mr. Filner's comments about Iran. They're the problem. Iran is the problem. They're the world problem. We got a group of Iranian citizens that are in Camp Ashraf that the Iranian government does not like, wants them to go away, disappear from the earth if they had their way. Why is that? Probably because they oppose the regime in Iran. And I actually agree with you, Mr. Filner, that we should encourage groups that oppose the Iranian regime, because the best hope for the world is a peaceful regime change in Iran, and the Iranians have to do it wherever they are in the world. I just don't know why our State Department is so hard-headed about delisting them from the MEK, but they are. So we need to intervene and get them off the MEK list. Dr. McCasey, or Judge McCasey, which I'd prefer to call you that if that's okay.
He likes general.
Judge McCasey, the camp, if it's moved somewhere else in Iraq, what do you think will happen to the residents?
That can't possibly, nothing good is the short answer. It is not in any way a threat to Iran where it is. Certainly nobody from the camp has lobbed anything into Iran, nor have any of the incursions against the camp come from Iran. They've come from Iraq. So moving them within Iraq isn't going to solve any problems. So the only thing it'll do is take them out of sight and thereby allow the Iraqi government, at the behest of the Iranians, to finish them off. That would be a disaster.
What is the relationship right now with Maliki and Ahmadinejad?
it appears to be a close relationship. The Iranians call the shots, and Maliki acts in accordance with what serves their interest.
Colonel, let me ask you this question. Since you were there, are the MEK terrorists today?
The MEK are not terrorists today. And if I may continue, sir, in May of 1972, the MEK leadership was rolled up, and Rajavi and many others ended up in prison just prior to that. And then there was a split within the MEK to a communist. When Rajavi was released from prison, he was able to bring the MEK back together outside of the prisons. And that is the organization you see today.
The United States is getting ready to leave Iraq. What happens when we leave?
When we leave
to the camp?
When we leave, sir, the camp will be annihilated.
My last question, I just hope it's open to the panel. So what do we do? What do we do? United States government, Congress, what should we do?
I think that's such a good question. We're going to have each one of the witnesses give us a 1-minute answer on that. How about that, Your Honor?
My recommendation, sir, is we get them delisted immediately. We get them out of camp as soon as possible, certainly before the end of the year. I am willing to get on the plane and go over and help load them up if that's what it takes.
Judge?
I agree, and if it takes, in order to get around Homeland Security objections, a special bill, I'm sure that that's something that's not beyond the power of this body. To get some members, I'm not suggesting that all of the residents of Ashraf be resettled here, but certainly if we take the lead, taking some folks in, then we can persuade other countries to do likewise. But the first step is delisting. If they are still listed as a terrorist organization, it becomes impossible to move them anyplace else. Delisting is, for certain, the first and essential step.
And Dr. Morris?
Delist the MEK must happen first. We must recommit to fulfilling our promise that we made to the people of Ashraf. You know, I appreciate what Mr. Takei has said. We're talking about decades ago. Even if we want to debate this, the UK has been debating it. The European Union, they've already concluded the debate. We need, though, to realize there's 3,400 human beings in Ashraf, and there's going to be a genocide unless we intervene and do something. I think the United States government to take responsibility for the solemn promise it made and to fulfill it, whether it's through the U.S. military forces, UNAMI, somehow we've got to keep our word in this world.
Dr. Takei?
As I mentioned in my testimony, Congressman, I think the UN Refugee Commission should hold responsibility for them. As sizable members of the Camp Ashraf are actually passport holders or residents of other countries, Canada, France, or something. I believe under international law, those countries are obligated to take back their citizens. United States would be obligated to do so if it is a citizen abroad in jeopardy. And the remaining of them, the United Nations, should look for safe haven for them. I do agree that they cannot be repatriated to Iran, certainly, and their situation in Iraq does seem precarious.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Sherman, you are not a member of the subcommittee. We do have a member of the subcommittee here, and we will recognize your contribution and the right to ask questions as soon as the final subcommittee member, Mr. Rivera, has his time. Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand from all the testimony and all the information and the history that certainly the Iraqi government, as it is currently constituted, does not seem to want the MEK in their country, and I certainly understand that under no circumstances can they be sent back to Iran, and also certainly understand that the physical integrity of the residents of the camp must be protected. Given all of these different circumstances. I guess my first question is, what does the MEK, based on all of your knowledge, I'll start with the judge, what does the MEK want their fate to be, given all of these constraints?
I think they simply want to be able to function.
Where?
Wherever they can, both within Iran.
Within Iran?
Yeah, no, I don't mean sending the Ashraf residents back, but they want to have connection to people in Iran with whom they have contact so that they can effect regime change. But they can't function in that fashion as long as they continue to be listed as a terrorist organization.
In terms of physical residents, colonel, I'll go to the colonel. What do they want their fate to be?
The first fate would be to continue to operate in the Ashraf area unimpeded. However, Madam Parsai has specifically told Lieutenant General Gardner and myself, if you want us to move, we will come to the United States or another country where they know they can be secure and they can be protected. They are willing to leave.
Well, if that is the case, does the United States have a plan toward that end to settle them, to have them leave? Or does anyone have a plan?
The United States, I know for a fact, has no plan. And we have seen, and it was mentioned this morning, this afternoon, the State Department is not responding to the calls of Congress. They're not responding to the findings of the judicial branch. And if I may be so bold, as an American warrior, I carry the copy of the Constitution with me. The first branch our founding fathers put down was the legislative because it was the most important and it represented the will of the people. And then came the executive to carry out that will, and then came the judicial to make sure it was being done right. We have a sub-element of the executive branch ignoring both the legislative and the judicial branch.
And Dr. Takai, or maybe your best qualified to answer is, what is Iraq's plan?
I'm not quite sure if Iraq has a plan to deal with that. I think the Iraqi regime seems to be in control of ill-disciplined forces who may not be able to control the physical integrity of the camp as you suggest. This is why I suggest that one of the ways we could go about this is to interview individual camp members to see where they go, if they have nationalities, for instance, in Europe and others.
So if we were to ask Malachi right now, what is your plan, what would he respond?
Well, I'm not quite sure if he has one. I think it's a problem that neither Iraqis know what to do because this endangers their relationship with Iran. It complicates their relationship with the United States. And it also complicates Malachi's own relationship with the Shi'i community given the fact that MEK has been implicated in violence against Iraqi Shi'is during the Saddam's tenure.
Well, let me ask this. Judge, does anyone have a plan? European Union, Arab League? Does anyone have a plan?
Not that I'm aware of. A particular plan as to the residents of Ashraf? Not that I'm aware of.
Congressman, the United Nations does have experience in dealing with displaced refugees. And therefore, they may not have a specific plan for residents of Camp Ashraf, but they do have experience with individuals.
What can the United Nations do to implement their plan?
Well,
how can they enforce it?
Well, for one thing, the camp can come under authority of the United Nations, where they would be essentially in control of its physical security.
Would Malachi permit that?
Well, that's something for the United Nations and Maliki to negotiate with each other. The other thing they can do is look for safe havens for them, which they're more experienced in doing. The United Nations does run refugee camps in a vast number of countries.
Well, safe havens also imply that those countries provide assent to the camp residents going into.
Well, some of them,
have any countries expressed any interest in that?
Some of them who are dual nationals would have to be taken back from their country. If they're nationals of Canada.
Have any countries expressed interest in taking back
the dual nationals? It's a question of law. They have to be taken back by the original. Otherwise.
But has any country publicly expressed interest?
I think some European countries have.
Such as?
Sweden and so forth.
Sweden?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chairman will, when everyone else has had their time question, will begin my questioning. However, now we recognize Mr. Brad Sherman, who also has been very active on this issue, but not necessarily on this subcommittee.
And I thank the chairman for his patience. Practical question or two, Mr. Attorney General. If if someone happens to be, say, have a visa to go to Sweden, are they allowed to leave Camp Ashraf and go there?
So far as I'm aware, they are.
Okay. And would the residents of Camp Ashraf be safe anywhere in Iraq, say in a Sunni part of that country, or is it critical that we get them out? I see the Colonel with an answer.
I will gladly answer that question.
And then not to mention, obviously, any moving of them would be dangerous and would have to be carried out, I think, by U.S. forces. But if they arrived in some other part of Iraq, would they be any safer from there now?
I agree with the young lady that was in the video at the very front. They would not be safe.
So either there has to be U.S. or UN protection of Camp Ashraf, or much better, the people have got to be outside of both Iran and Iraq.
That is correct. And if I may add to this, we had approximately 195 defectors that was being protected at the American camp. Working with Barzani, we were able to get them released into Kurdistan, and their fate was a very terrible one, and they ended up having to come back and asking for financial help from the MEK so that they could try to move on with their lives. So the answer, as proven by evidence with what happened to the defectors, is nowhere in Iraq is safe.
Dr. Takei, you seem to be the only person here who thinks it might be okay for the MEK to stay on the terrorist list. Are you aware of any terrorist action attributed to the MEK after the last terrorist action attributed to the IRA?
In terms of, in Iraq itself, there's allegations of MEK being part of Saddam's machine against the Shi'i residents before their disarmament. Throughout the tenure of Saddam, those are the allegations.
Are those acts classified as acts of terrorism by the State Department? And are there any specific acts that are attributed?
Well, there's certainly the contention of the Iraqi government that they have, that the MEK membership during Saddam's tenure were actually acting as his Praetorian Guard.
Well, what about the Praetorian Guard of Saddam Hussein and his other? I mean, is everyone who served in the Iraqi army considered a terrorist by the United States?
I'm not suggesting that, Congressman. I'm just suggesting that they were used in specific campaigns, particularly against the Shi'i population in the South in 1991.
Okay. Now, the MEK was designated in 1997, but every act of terrorism that you've described in your statements, at least when I was here in this room, were a long time before then. Were they designated in 1997 because that was part of an olive branch to Tehran, or because the State Department finally got around to looking at the actions taken in the 1980s and 1970s?
I wasn't in the State Department in 1997 when the designation took place. I'm not quite certain of the reasoning to do so at that time. I'm sure there's the representative of the State Department at that time and subsequently can respond to your question.
Well, what I've been told is again and again that the MEK is on that list as an olive branch to Tehran. It's not working out real well. Colonel, do you have any insight as to why action was taken of all times in 1997, decades after the most offensive actions taken by the MEK?
Sometimes when you have enemies, you have to compliment them for a great skill. Iran beautifully portrayed itself as going to a more moderate government that was trying to open up to the West. There's nothing moderate because the Supreme Council would not have allowed, and we saw what happened in 2009 when they did have a chance for a moderate president. So they presented themselves as moderate, and in turn, we gave them the olive branch that you mentioned. Then when it was convenient for Tehran, then next thing you know, Ahmadinejad is now...
So we twisted our semi-judicial or administrative determination for political reasons, and in this case, for the wrong political reasons.
I totally agree.
Does anyone else on the panel have a comment? Now back.
And thank you very much. We have Mr. Carnahan with us, and you may proceed, Mr. Carnahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel. I apologize for missing some of your testimony. I had to step out for just a minute.
But I wanted to come back and start with Dr. Takei. And given that the PMOI-MEK received safe harbor under Saddam Hussein and helped Iraq fight against Iran during the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s, how does this group hold enough legitimacy in Iran to be a viable opposition to the current regime, particularly considering the nature of the culture? Could you talk about that?
I don't think it is a credible opposition movement within Iran, as perceived by credible Iranian opposition movements, such as the Green Movement representative, which have forsworn any relationship with MEK and have denounced it at every turn. I mean, you see that in secular opposition in Iran and this umbrella organization that comes under the auspices of the Green Movement.
We have limited means of engaging the Iranian people now. How would U.S. support for the MEK affect the Iranian popular opinion in the U.S. and more broadly, how there are better ways that we can engage with the Iranian people and the Iranian opposition?
I think the task at hand is how does the United States empower the Green Movement in its attempt to create a democratic society in Iran and try to liberalize the Iranian government and in due course displace the theoretical regime that's in power. That's the key challenge that we have today. We have a lot of experience with that during the Cold War with our assistance to Solidarity in Poland, with our assistance to other Eastern European opposition movements in their efforts against communist governments in Eastern Bloc. I think some of those lessons can be used to assist the indigenous, viable, legitimate opposition within Iran, which comes under the auspices of the Green Movement.
Thank you, and I wanted to just open this up for the rest of the panel to address the issue of the practicality of relocation as an option. Can that work? Does that work? And what are your thoughts on that? Let me start with General Mukasey, and we'll go down the line.
Well, if people are going to be killed where they are, then it seems to me that relocation is the only practical alternative. To respond directly to your question. Also to comment on something that Dr. Takei just said, there is, as far as I know, no example of any situation in which help to a dissident group in a totalitarian country was successful. Poland was not a totalitarian country at the time that we helped Solidarity. You try to help an organization in a totalitarian country, there's only one way to get rid of a totalitarian government, and that is to overthrow it.
Thank you. Dr. Morse, sorry.
Ashraf is probably the safest place for them right now. They're very close to Balad or Camp Anaconda, which is one of the largest U.S. bases in Iraq. They're very close to Baghdad. Relatively close to Baghdad. It's an area that is very scrutinized. So to move them anywhere else within Iraq would just, it would certainly be less safe and more dangerous.
Great. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Ms. Sheila Jackson Lee is not a member of this subcommittee, I believe, but she has interest in this particular issue, and as I say, as chairman, I will be the last person to ask the questions today, but I think I have several important questions to ask, so you may proceed, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Well, Mr. Chairman, again, in your absence, I thank you for your kindness and indulgence, and also allow me to recognize you, both you and the ranking member, on your astuteness on issues dealing with human rights and fairness and simple practicality on questions that seem to be unanswerable but seem to be common sense. I guess the question is, how do you allow persons to be murdered and the guns used against those persons being funded by the United States of America? It continues to baffle me. Before you came into the room, and as I acknowledge again Mr. Carnahan and my colleague, Mr. Filner, we have both experienced over the years enough indictment for our concern about the individuals who are in a membership by the name of the MEK, but more importantly, the brutality against fellow human beings. It amazes me that, again, blood has been shed. Treasure of the United States has died in Iraq so that Iraqis might live free and might have the blessings of democracy and choice of that democracy, and yet we are covered with the blood of others at the hands of, as we have come to understand, the allegations of Iraqi soldiers. Judge McKenzie, help me with, you have 7 pages that I will read more extensively. Would you help me with laws that you say that we are not enforcing, and give me those tools? You said that we are not enforcing certain laws that we need to do. Would you repeat those again for me, please?
I think what is often described in shorthand as the Leahy Amendment, which is actually 2 statutory provisions, one of which relates to use of foreign aid, the second of which relates to use of military aid, and bars the use of such aid when it goes to military organizations that have committed human rights violations, unless there is a finding, in the case of military aid, unless there's a finding by the Secretary of Defense of overriding necessity. And I don't know of any such finding here. So the Leahy Amendment is, it seems to me, right on the nose. I think Senator Leahy, the author of that one.
I have not looked at your bio, so I cannot say in certainty whether you were in the military or not in the military, but I know that you've been both a outstanding jurist and the Attorney General. Would you suggest that the actions of this past incident accounted for, do you believe it is well documented that the violence was perpetrated by soldiers that were in Iraqi uniforms or Iraqis and with guns that resulted in the deaths of the 30-plus individuals?
There's no doubt of it, and we have identified, as I understand it, the precise units that participated in this operation. So that's relatively easy to come by.
Commander, can you, Morris, can you document or suggest any reason why tanks and commandos and guns were approaching that camp? Was there any national security reason from your perspective?
No reason other than that I believe the Maliki government is planning to exterminate the people of Ashraf, and this is a part of a long series of actions that are probably going to occur until they're ultimately victorious.
Well, does that sound like to you a conspiracy with Iran, a country that now has a potential nuclear capacity threatening the world, and the leader of Iraq is now in cahoots to attack individuals who cannot defend themselves, or at least defend themselves against tanks?
Congresswoman, I arrived in Iraq in January of 2004, shortly after the Iraq War began. And from my first days on the ground, I saw the influence of Iran within Iraq, because Ashraf is close to that border. It's been there ever since. It's growing. It's obvious. It's intentional. And in fact, in 2004, I made the comment to some of my fellow officers, Iran, we basically are going to come in here and take out Saddam, create a power vacuum, and create a greater Tehran right here in Iraq. And it's happening right before our eyes.
Let me just conclude, Chairman. Well, I'll just conclude. I see the light, sir. Thank you very much. Let me just conclude by saying my outrage cannot be expressed, and again, I ask our government, which I have great respect for, to immediately denounce and ask for a ceasing of the collaboration between the Iraqi government, of which we are funding, and Iran, which has become the world's enemy, to destroy and kill innocent persons, and whatever laws that we have, Chairman Rumbacher, that we can use, the Leahy Amendment should be implemented immediately. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jackson-Lee, and to all of our other members who participated today. I again apologize that earlier I had to leave. I did actually go from here straight to the floor of the House and to deal with an amendment that would defund our friends in Pakistan, which has something to do with some of the issues we're discussing today, and so is vitally important. However, I'm very pleased that we were able to get the questioning in from those of us who were here able to spend the entire time with us. Let me just ask a few questions here. It's Dr. Morsh, you were in Camp Ashraf in what year?
2004.
2004. Now, in 2004, correct me if I'm wrong, the FBI actually went to Camp Ashraf and interviewed all of the residents of Camp Ashraf to find out if any of them were indeed terrorists. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And are you aware of what the FBI determined by their questioning of all of each and every member, or each and every one of the people there at Camp Ashraf?
Yes, sir. I was there during the entire interrogation phase, and from the beginning to the end, all 34, or at that time maybe a few more, were interrogated. I did not see the official report of the FBI, but I talked to the agents and the interviewers on a daily basis as they'd come back from spending the day in these interviews, and they expressed tremendous frustration that they had come to Ashraf with particular people they thought they were going to be able to take back to the U.S. to prosecute for various nefarious criminal or terrorist activities, and day by day they were not able to find any evidence on any illegal criminal or terrorist activities, and finally left empty-handed, as they said, and they were quite disappointed.
To the point that was just made, Dr. Taki, have you seen this FBI report?
I have not, Congress.
You have not. And you question that the FBI was conducting a proper investigation of those individuals?
I have no insight into their investigation.
Okay. And when you have expressed your concern about the MEK since since 04, so that's last 6 years, you have been expressing concern that the MEK might, be worthy of designating a terrorist organization, but you have not bothered to go and find the FBI report that went in and investigated that specifically?
I'm not quite sure if that FBI report is actually for public consumption, nor have I been intensely engaged in the MEK terrorism debate, as you suggest, in the past 6 years.
So you're not sure whether the FBI report is for public consumption, but
Congressman, I simply can't comment on a report I haven't seen.
I understand, but I guess what the question is you are a PhD, and when these people are talking as, you might say, credible witness on issues, especially when someone has a scholarly background, a PhD, that you would expect they would go to all sources, especially ones that were directly related to investigating a specific charge. But you did not go to...
I don't think...
You didn't try to seek out the FBI report.
I don't think that FBI report was publicly available. I believe it's under classification.
But the operative words is "I think," which means you did not...
I'd be happy to look at the report and come back to you with my observations.
All I'm saying is that usually if one was to be someone to argue a case, they would at least take the time to see if something was available or not. Dr. Moore...
Ordinarily, Congressman, FBI reports of this nature are not available, and my colleague himself has said he didn't see the report.
Okay, well, I'm not sure whether the FBI report is available or if the conclusion was available. My guess is that at the very least, the conclusion that the FBI made was made available, and that is,
I'm not sure if that's
your
correct.
understanding that the FBI concluded, is that your testimony today, that the charge that these people were still a terrorist organization was debunked. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That was the point of the investigation, and again, they didn't find anything. This is my unofficial discussions with numerous members of the OGA personnel who were there on site for the several months of this investigation.
Yeah, and when you are suggesting that all 3,400 people there were questioned by the FBI,
all of them were questioned by the FBI and/or other representatives that had arrived, perhaps 100 outside personnel. Very efficient, organized interrogation process.
Now, let me just note that I've been involved politically since I was in my teens, and I have seen different organizations evolve into different things, and many of the Iranian exile community still remember the MEK as an organization that was involved with assassinating members of the Shah's government. By the way, not to say that the Shah was not a dictatorship as well. And when people are struggling for democracy against a dictatorship, usually you have to use force. But that still would not necessarily say that what the MEK was doing was acceptable.
The MEK use of violence did not stop in its opposition to the Shah's regime. It continued in the aftermath.
Yes.
And has continued throughout the aftermath of past 30 years. And it continued against Iranian civilians within Iran and Iraqis within Iraq once they relocated there. So it's a long history of violence.
Well, that was let me just note for you, this is a territory that is filled with violence. I mean, whether you're talking about the Shah or whether you're talking about the Mullah regime, you're talking about incredible violence. I would be surprised if there was any organization that existed that wasn't in some way involved with the use of force, at least to protect themselves.
Oh, I disagree with that. Within Iran, there are many opposition movements, such as the Green Movement, that explicitly rejects violence for civil disobedience and protests and demonstrations.
Or like the American Revolution, where we, oh, wait a minute, no, we did use violence there, didn't we? Let me suggest that I would ask our friends in the audience not to applaud or to be fair to all of our witnesses.
At least one.
You've got a lot of courage. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you being here today, knowing that you're going to get some very pointed questions. So your suggestion is the MEK today has been branded and as unacceptable by the leaders of the Green Movement in Iran?
Yes, that's right.
Let us note that the Green Movement, as I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, has dissociated itself from violence as a means of achieving their goals. But also let us note that just because that does not mean that an opposition group to a despicable dictatorial regime that uses torture and violence against its people, that anyone who chooses to resist it in a violent fashion doesn't make them right or wrong. This is not, we are not going to get the mullahs to give up power simply by proving that they're thugs, by letting them beat people up and suppress people at will. In fact, I will have to admit, one of the things that attracts me to this movement is that it is willing to fight for the rights of the people of Iran against a very oppressive regime that's willing to kill people to stay in power. And but if the Green Movement has not accepted that, and that the use of force has been something that the MEK is willing to do and it separates it from the Green Movement, let us accept that. That is being a reality. That doesn't necessarily make it the right position in the United States to back just pacifists in the world. Backing people who fight against tyranny is also something the United States could be doing. Colonel, you seem like you are anxious to say something.
I thank you, sir. One point that needs to be pointed out, in the membership of the MEK inside Camp Ashraf, there are only 2 people that were involved in the organization in the early 1970s, and I'm holding their names for their own safety. One was in prison with Rajavi, and the other one I know personally, and he's a good friend. I can honestly say neither one of those 2 people were involved.
Well, it is very difficult for me, and after seeing the video that we had, which is very clear evidence of a massacre of unarmed people, is there any reason for us to believe that if they were not designated a terrorist organization, that the person who ordered them to go in with those troops and shoot down unarmed civilians might not have issued that order? Colonel?
I'll lead out on that one, sir. I think yes, because at the pace, the State Department has been basically moving at the pace of a startled snail. And when you see the Maliki government doing things wrong, and to include the attack 2 years ago, and our State Department and our government does nothing about it, but we keep them on the terrorist list, claiming they're a bunch of bad people, we're given justification. And then when the attack is over, we also do nothing about it. We remember the pictures of Abu Ghraib. This Abu Ghraib was minor compared to what happened at Camp Ashraf. It was very hideous and it was very wrong. But all of a sudden, our whole nation was inflamed and the world was inflamed, and it was a recruiting tool for the Al-Qaeda. But then we see blatant murder, and then we look the other way. That just encourages more.
Your point is very well made, Colonel. I think that there are consequences to political designations and consequences in the actions of the people who order it and the people who are decision makers in other countries, which leads us to Prime Minister Maliki. And does this indicate, does this slaughter that we have seen of the people in Camp Ashraf indicate that the government now of Prime Minister Maliki is perhaps in a subservient position to the Iranian mullah regime?
If I may again, sir, I see him subservient to three different elements. One is the Iranian regime, two is Hakim, and three is Muqtada Sadr. And we saw this even in the execution of Saddam. Muqtada Sadr was the one who said to his followers, Saddam will not live to see the light of a new year. And then suddenly, Task Force 134 gets a call from Maliki himself saying, I want Saddam turned over tomorrow. And you remember the spectacle of that. Maliki is taking orders from three different elements. And as you recall, Alawi won the election, but Maliki would not follow the Constitution and work with Alawi. And as a result, Alawi won the election, but he lost the government.
Well, the mullah regime, obviously, let me just put it, Dr. Taki, you've suggested that actually the MEK is not a major force in this part of the world, that in Iraq they're not considered to be an important player.
In Iraq?
Excuse me, in Iran.
Yes.
That they're not a major part of the resistance or opposition. Why would the mullah regime be so concerned about them if they weren't a player?
Oh, the paranoid politics of the Islamic Republic are beyond my comprehension. They're concerned about every expression of dissent. That's what totalitarian countries, governments are like. They try to squash any form of dissent. But in terms of array of forces that could displace the current regime, I don't think MEK will play a role in that.
Okay. I'm not sure what role MEK will play. I'm not sure what their position is in terms of the people of Iran and the Green Movement, etc., as well as the mullahs. But it does seem to me to be clear that Maliki, the Prime Minister of Iraq, thought that he was doing a favor for his buddies in Tehran in committing this massacre. Let's go to a little bit about the relocation and such. Are all of you suggesting then that relocation in the United States is what you think will probably be the end result of this?
I suggest in my testimony that should come under the auspices of the United Nations
Right.
Refugee Commission.
But the United Nations is located in New York, I think. That's
well, it has offices all over the place, and
maybe we
all
could
over the place, yes.
maybe we could house them in the UN offices in New York. And yes,
Mr. Chairman, I think that the United States should be prepared to take all or the majority of them, but I do think that many other countries, as we are seeing in Europe, who are unilaterally taking actions in Libya and other places that they think are on the best interest on the world stage. I believe there's tremendous momentum, critical mass building, and I believe if the United States would take a lead, or the UN, I believe we would find a host of countries be willing to take members of Ashraf.
Colonel Martin certainly has made that point that we've got citizens from various countries there, and the witness that we had at our briefing prior to the hearing today was a young lady from Canada. And maybe, Doctor, you could let me know how many people there at Camp Ashraf would you suggest have such ties? What percentage of that 3,400 have ties to elsewhere?
While I was there, I did not consider whether they were citizens or whether they had green cards or visas, but I was impressed with the number of people who had been received graduate and postgraduate degrees in developed countries, in Europe, and in the United States and Canada. I mean, many hundreds of the residents were very well educated, spoke very good English.
Yes, sir.
I should point out that Mr. Struan Stevenson of the European Parliament introduced actually a European plan to first provide security at Ashraf via UNAMI, a United Nations entity, with the help of the U.S. military, and then at the same time with the EU and the U.S. To resettle residents in Europe and the U.S.
Let's just note that my observation, personal observation, is that the people involved in this movement are highly educated people and highly motivated and have a great sense of unity. And while the United States has been in Iraq, which I will close with a closing statement about the wisdom of us going into Iraq in the first place, considering what this incident is telling us about the Iraqi government. But as long as we were there, we could make promises, and we did make promises to the people of Camp Ashraf. But I think that we should be proud that as when we were there in Iraq, that we didn't send the wrong message to the mullahs that we were cowards and that we didn't believe that only pacifists can bring down the mullah regime. The mullahs, it won't be just pacifism, be people with courage and people who stand up, people who have their own motives, whether they have their own religious group or their own social group. There are groups of patriots during the American Revolution that brought down British control of America. And they all weren't just of one mind. Some of them, in fact, were religious fanatics. They had Christian cults that lived in the United States who supported us, and that's our history. But they had their rights, and they were willing to fight for them. So let me just leave with one last thought. I'm going to give you a chance to express the last thought, and then I'm going to express maybe one minute worth of thought. Mr. Carnahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I just want to personally say to the Chairman for his work on this issue, his leadership, and leading our delegation there, demanding answers to tough questions, both from the Maliki government, but also from our own government, in terms of how we go forward, bring people to justice, and find out how we can go forward to find a safe haven for the people there. So again, thank you, and thank you to the witnesses for bringing your expertise to bear here today.
All right, and I will finish with this. Number one, there will be a list of questions offered to the State Department concerning the massacre at Camp Ashraf, including when they knew about what and who gave orders for our military to leave, et cetera, and I've detailed some of those questions. So there will be official list of questions from this committee to the State Department, and we will expect an answer. If we do not get an answer, I will proceed with making sure that we have a follow-up hearing until those questions are answered. And finally, let me just leave with this thought. The invasion and the liberation, you might say, of Iraq was something that I supported. I mean, I trusted President Bush that he knew what he was doing, that he had a good grip on how to make sure that we got that job done, and that it was necessary, that it was absolutely necessary for us to go into that country with heavy armored divisions and in such a big way. I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong to put my trust in his judgment, and I had worked for the President of the United States, and I assumed that he had a similar responsible position toward the American people and sending the American military, as did the president who I worked for, which was Ronald Reagan. And that was not the case. And the United States has paid a dear price, probably $1 trillion of wealth, which may have been one of the major factors in kicking us into this horrible economic crisis that we're on the edge of today, as well as thousands and thousands of our young people dead, and many tens of thousands more who lost parts of their body or their faces were blown off, or they now live in misery because their homes, their home lives are destroyed. And that's the price we Americans have paid. And Americans don't mind fighting for freedom. Americans don't. That's our job. We come from every race, every religion, and every ethnic group, so we can show the world there's a better way. But the ingratitude that I have found in our visit to Iraq was overwhelming. I think that the members of the MEK that I have met here in the United States exemplify a commitment to freedom, and no matter how activist or what their organization did in the past, they're committed to freedom and democracy today. And certainly the slaughter there at that camp, we should have taken more caution and more care to see that that did not happen. And I think we all believe that. Let's just make sure that no more of these people who are friends of freedom are murdered by the Mullah regime in Tehran or by their stooges who now control the government of Iraq. Thank you very much. This hearing is adjourned.
تلویزیون صدای آمریکا گزارشی از جلسه استماع در کنگره آمریکا که از سوی کمیته تحقیقات و نظارت بر اعمال دولت در کمیته روابط خارجی مجلس نمایندگان ایالات متحده برگزار گردید پخش کرد که توجه شما را به بخش‌هایی از آن جلب می‌کنیم.
روز پنجشنبه یکی از کمیته‌های جانبی کمیته امور خارجه مجلس نمایندگان آمریکا جلسه با عنوان کشتار در اردوگاه اشرف و الزام‌های سیاست خارجی آمریکا برگزار کرد. در این جلسه وقایع ماه آوریل در اردوگاه اشرف که به کشته شدن 30 نفر از ساکنان اشرف در جریان درگیری با نیروهای عراقی منجر شد مورد بررسی قرار گرفت. رضا اللهیاری در این جلسه شرکت داشت. آقای اللهیاری، بحث انتقال ساکنان اردوگاه اشرف به کشور ثالث از مدتیه که بحث برانگیز شده. اظهار نظرهای درباره بازگردوندن اونها به ایران شده، عده‌ای هم از انتقال اونها به کشورهای اروپایی و یا نقطه از عراق که از مرز ایران دوره میگن. آیا این نشست نتیجه‌ای برای تعیین محل بعدی سکونت ساکنان اردوگاه اشرف در صورت انتقال به دست داد یا خیر؟
معمولا خانم محمدی این گونه نشست‌ها فقط بررسی میکنن و نتایج اون به این زودی معلوم نمیشه که بلافاصله بدونیم که این نتیجه ملموس بلافاصله داشته یا نه، ولی مورد بررسی قرار میگیره این مسئله. جلسه که دیروز در مجلس نمایندگان و در کمیته فرعی نظارت و تحقیق مجلس برگزار شد به این موضوع پرداخت با ریاست رورا بکر که نماینده جمهوری خواه از ایالت کالیفرنیا است و همینطور 4 کارشناس مهم در این جلسه شرکت داشتن. 2 تن از اونها کسانی بودن که قبلا در کمپ اشرف بودن از طرف آمریکا اونجا بودن، یکشون فرمانده اونجا بوده و همینطور وزیر سابق دادگستری آمریکا در این جلسه شرکت داشت که این وقایع و همینطور این جابجایی ها رو مورد بررسی قرار دادن. اردوگاه اشرف در عراق بیش از 20 سال است که 3400 نفر از اعضای سازمان مجاهدین خلق را در خود جای داده است. دولت جدید عراق که با جمهوری اسلامی ایران روابط دوستانه‌ای داشته، در صدد اخراج ساکنان اردوگاه اشرف از عراق بوده است. در 8 آوریل سال جاری، نیروهای امنیتی عراق با حمله به این اردوگاه دست کم 34 نفر را کشته و بیش از 100 نفر را مجروح کردند. یک گروه از قانونگذاران آمریکا که در ماه گذشته برای تحقیق در این زمینه به عراق رفته بود، نتوانستند مجوزی برای دیدار با ساکنان این اردوگاه کسب کنند. شیلا جکسون لی، نماینده دموکرات ایالت تگزاس، روز پنجشنبه خواستار رعایت حقوق بشر و ارائه خدمات درمانی به ساکنان کمپ اشرف شد و از کنگره خواست تا سفیر عراق را برای ادای توضیح در مورد یورش نیروهای امنیتی عراق به اردوگاه اشرف فراخواند. کنگره آمریکا پیشتر از وزارت خارجه این کشور خواسته است تا نام سازمان مجاهدین خلق را از فهرست سازمان‌های تروریستی حذف کند، کاری که پیشتر توسط اتحادیه اروپا و دولت بریتانیا صورت گرفته است. بحثی که در جریان هست در مورد خارج کردن نام این سازمان از فهرست سازمان‌های تروریستی کمک خواهد کرد که اینها بتونن ساکنان کمپ اشرف در جاهای دیگه بتونن مستقر بشن. بحث‌های متفاوتی در این مورد وجود داره. یکی جابجاییشون در عراق هست که مطرح شده. مسئله دیگه پذیرفتن این از طرف کشور آمریکا و یا کشورهای همپیمان آمریکا مانند سوئد هستش که اینها بتونن این افراد رو در خودشون جای بدن، ولی کمک بزرگی در این مسئله به این جابجایی خواهد کرد همون برطرف کردن و برداشتن نام اینها از اون لیست وزارت خارجه خواهد بود. خانم محمدی؟
بله، خیلی ممنون. رضا اللهیاری از کنگره.
در جلسه استماع کنگره در مقابل دفاع و حمایت عموم نمایندگان و شهود حاضر در این اجلاس از مجاهدین، تنها فردی که اتهامات و اراجیف آخوندپسند را به عنوان شهادت علیه مجاهدین تکرار کرد، رضا ریتکیه بود که اظهاراتش با واکنش بسیار منفی و پاسخهای روشن و قاطع نمایندگان و شهود اجلاس مواجه شد و به شدت مفتضح گردید. ریتکیه که در این استماع خود را مدافع به اصطلاح جنبش سبز وانمود می‌کرد، فقط چند روز قبل از این جلسه به همراه همسرش سوزان مالونی از مؤسسه بروکینگز با انتشار مقاله‌ای نسبت به سقوط احمدی نژاد در تهران به عنوان ضربه‌ای برای آمریکا اسف اندوه خود را ابراز کرده بود، زیرا که احمدی نژاد خواستار سازش با آمریکا بوده. ریتکیه از بیش از 10 دهه قبل تا کنون فعالانه و بیوقفه از رژیم آخوندی دفاع نموده و بر ضرورت برقراری رابطه با آن و پرهیز از هر گونه فشار و محدودیت و تحریم علیه آن از جانب آمریکا قلم فرسایی و سخن پراکنی کرده است. به همین دلیل در کنار دیگر لابی ها و کارت های فشار رژیم آخوندی در آمریکا از سالها پیش در سلسله مقالات تحقیقی مخالفین رژیم در رسانه ها و وبسایت ها افشا شده است. در پاییز سال 83 رضا ریتکیه در تعریف و تمجید از هارترین باندهای رژیم به نام آبادگران که چهره سیاسی اصلی آن احمدی نژاد بود نوشت: پس از اینکه اکثر نامزدهای اصلاح طلب در انتخابات سال 2004 رد صلاحیت شدند، گروه بندی آبادگران ایران اسلامی بوده است که به عنوان جناح پیشرو در درون مجلس جدید پدید آمده که نشان می‌دهد پراگماتیست ها دارای یک پایگاه قابل توجه در درون قوه مقننه می باشند. ایالات متحده باید آماده برداشتن گام‌های اول بعد از انتخابات ایران در ماه می سال 2005 باشد. ری تکیه، فصلنامه واشنگتن، پاییز 2004. پس از اینکه در نمایش انتخابات ریاست جمهوری رژیم در سال 84 احمدی نژاد توسط ولی فقیه از صندوق‌ها درآمد، وی در مقاله‌ای نوشت: با وجود انتخاب یک دولت سخت سر در ایران، زمان اتفاقاً ممکن است برای یک معامله خوب باشد. ری تکیه، بالتیمور سان، 26 سپتامبر 2005. رضا ری تکیه در 22 فوریه 2007 در یک سخنرانی گفت: اکنون در ایران اجماع در تمام طیف سیاسی با پشتیبانی ولایت فقیه وجود دارد که ایران آماده مذاکره با ایالات متحده است. وی همچنین در مقاله تحت عنوان مسیر به همزیستی، سیاست جدید آمریکا در قبال ایران نوشت: درک این که خامنه‌ای نقطه شروع مناسب برای هر تعامل آمریکاست، این کار را روشنسازی می کند.
کار رژیم آخوندی در این مسخره بازار سیاسی و تبلیغاتیش علیه مجاهدین و مقاومت ایران فقط به این شکایت ها و آه و ناله منحصر نمی شد، بلکه به خیال برگردوندن موج و سمت دادن و متمرکز کردنش علیه مجاهدین وزارتخونه هاش رو موظف کرده بود، وزارت خارجه رو، اطلاعات رو، ارشادش رو و ارگان های مثل اون سازمان فرهنگ و ارتباطات رو و حتی انواع سایت های دستساز اطلاعات آخوندی رو هم به کار گرفته بود، بلکه با لجن پراکنی و جعل خبر و تزویر از این موج جهانی ضد تروریسم چیزی بهش برسه. اما آش جنگ روانی که اطلاعات آخوندی میپخت گاه اونقدر شور میشد که خان خودش هم میفهمید. به عنوان مثال اطلاعات آخوندی یک مزدور مستعملی رو به کار میگرفت تا از موضع یکی از رهبران مجاهدین، اونم چه رهبری، رهبر تازه بریده تازه نفس مجاهدین، بیاد غارهای زیرزمینی کشف بکنه در قرارگاه‌های مجاهدین در خاک عراق که گویا به قول وزارت اطلاعات مملو از تسلیحات هسته‌ای و شیمیایی و میکروبی، که بعد بیاد این رو با ذکر یک جزئیات موهوم و نمیدونم نقشه‌های مجهول در فلان نشریه دست چندم فلان کشور مثلا کانادا فاش بکنه، بعد برداره بیاره تو مطبوعات داخلیش به اون انعکاس بده و مثلا در روزنامه جمهوری اسلامی بپردازه به بازمشخارش که بله آمریکا چرا گذاشته که عراق، دولت عراق بره سلاح‌های هسته‌ای و شیمیایی و میکروبی خودش رو نزد مجاهدین منتقل بکنه، انبار بکنه. یا تو یک نمونه دیگری این هرز شیخک باند خاتمی ابتهی یکی از اطرافیان خودش رو که رفته بود خارج، حالا از ترس سنگسار یا هر چیزی به کار گرفته بود تا سنگ‌ها رو در فلان لجن‌نامه‌ای که رایگان توزیع میشه در یه محله نیویورک بیاد و نثار مجاهدین میکنه و مقاومت ایران و مثلا بنویسه که بله سناتورها و اکثریت کنگره آمریکا رو این مجاهدین با پول خریدن، کردها و شیعیان عراق رو این مجاهدین در عراق کشتند، اینها یک سپاه بزرگ مسلح تروریست دارند. ولی با این همه نشستن در چند صد متری اون طرف کاخ سفید و دفتر دارند. یا در سال 94 45 میلیون دلار پول جمع آوری کردن، 200,000 دلارش رو هم دادن به اعضای کنگره آمریکا که از اینها حمایت بکنند. نمونه دیگه ادعای سوء استفاده مجاهدین از پول بچه ها در آلمان برای خرید سلاح برای تأمین مخارج تروریستی که رژیم رادیو تلویزیون و مطبوعاتش رو با اون پر کرده بود. موضوعی که سابقش برمیگرده به درخواست‌های ملتمسانه خاتمی از مقامات آلمانی در سفر سال گذشتهش به آلمان که هموطنانمون اون رو در هم ریختند و پیگیری‌های بعدی آخوندی یونسی. میخوام بگم تناقض مسخره بازار آخوندی که مدعی است مجاهدین چنین و چنان هستند و میخواست از این قضایا برای خودش چیزی دست و پا بکنه، اینجا هم میزنه. چون از یک طرف میگوید که این مجاهدین میلیون ها پوند در انگلیس، میلیون ها دلار در آمریکا، میلیون ها مارک در آلمان و کجا و کجا و کجا جمع کردن صرف خرید سلاح و هزینه های تروریستی، در حالی که بابا 2 دهه مدعی بودی که پول اینها و سلاحشون از عراق میاد. بالاخره ما کدوم باور کنیم؟ به نظر میرسه که از حول این حلیم تروریستی آخوندها در نفی چیزی که قبلا خودشون گفته بودند سر از پا نشناختند. بعد هم این سایت سازی و سایت بازی علیه مجاهدین و شورای ملی مقاومت که از اختراعات و صنایع آخوندی یونسی است و 1-2 سال پیش میگفت که ما چه استفاده وسیعی میخوایم بکنیم از کامپیوتر و این قبیل چیزها در وزارت اطلاعات، که یک چشمش همین لجن پراکنی با سایت هست علیه مجاهدین و مقاومت ایران، به خصوص برای اعمال فشار روی خانواده ها در داخل ایران و انتشار مطالب و مکاتبات مجعول.
در روز 4 بهمن در رسانه‌های رژیم آمده بود که خاتمی در نامه خود به مقام معظم رهبری عنوان کرده که جریان اصلاح طلب و ما دولت موجود را به رسمیت می‌شناسیم، اما باید جلوی تندروی ها را گرفت. تندروی هم در این سو وجود دارد هم در آن سو. آیا در این نقطه بیشتر از این میشد موج سبز را در گل و لای و باطلاق ولایت قربانی و مزمحل و منفعل کرد؟ اینکه در این ایام میگویند جنبش سبز فقط 3 سر دارد که موسوی و خاتمی و کروبی است، بسیار مشکوک می نماید. هر کس می داند که خاتمی چگونه و از کجا بین آن 2 سر دیگر سبز شد به ما هم بگوید. مشکوکتر از این شعاری بود که در 20 بهمن تحت عنوان هشدارهای کلیدی برای راهپیمایی 22 بهمن در انتهای مجموعه راهنمودها منتشر شد. درود بر 3 سید حسینی، خمینی و موسوی و خاتمی. به نظر می رسد ابداع کنندگان این شعار قبل از هر چیز قصد کفن و دفن سیاسی موسوی را با ساندویچ کردن او در میانه خمینی و خاتمی داشتند. آیا پیام این موج سبز همین است؟ همین 3 سید حسینی و جاسازی کردن موسوی بین خمینی و خاتمی؟ آیا این تسلیم به مقام ولایت نیست؟ آیا این منفعل شدن و مضمحل شدن در آستان ولایت و منفعل کردن و مضمحل کردن سایرین نیست؟ باور کنید که همین مجاهدین و مقاومت ایران که آماج آن گونه حملات آقای موسوی قرار گرفتند، به نسبت مبدع چنین شعاری 100 بار بیشتر خیرخواه او بودند. آخر فراخواندن او به جبهه مردم ایران و راهگشایی برای او در این مسیر کم چیزی نبود. کار هر کس هم نبود. معنی و ارزش آن در سالهای آینده بیشتر روشن می شود. در همان 23 راهنمود کلیدی که گفتم در 20 بهمن برای راهپیمایی 22 بهمن منتشر شد، بوالعجب فراوان است. ابتدا نوشته است: آنچه در پی می آید مجموعه‌ای از توصیه‌هایی است که حاصل خرد جمعی سبزها برای حضوری پرشکوه و با اقتدار در جریان تظاهرات 22 بهمن است. بهتر است پوشش ظاهری غیر متمایز و حتی الامکان محافظه کارانه داشته باشید. حتی در مقابل خشونت نورزید. شعارهای هنجار شکن ندهید. از شعارهای متین و محترمانه‌ای استفاده کنید که مورد پذیرش همه سبزها و رهبران جنبش سبز باشد و به مخالفان گزک ندهید. با شعارهای متعادل غیر سبزها را سبز کنید. مواظب باشید صدا و سیما نتواند سناریو سازی کند. مانند کارناوال عاشورا، پاره کردن تصویر امام خمینی، توهین به امام حسین. مراقب دام و فریب شیادان باشید. ممکن است با نماد سبز شعارهای هنجار شکن بدهند، عکس پاره کنند، اتومبیلی را آتش بزنند و غیره. هرگز با آنان همصدا نشوید. هرگز به کسانی که عکس احمدی نژاد یا رهبر را دارند توهین نکنید. به بسیجیان توهین نکنید. عجبا، حتی اتحادیه اروپا و آمریکا هم در بیانیه مشترک خود برای ما چنین شرط و شروطی قائل نشده‌اند که مبادا شعارهای هنجار شکن و ساختار شکن بدهیم. مبادا عکس خمینی و خامنه‌ای و احمدی نژاد را پاره کنیم. مبادا به خمینی و خامنه‌ای و احمدی نژاد و به بسیجیان توهین کنیم. مبادا خودروی نظام را که از روی ما یا خواهر و برادر و پدر و مادرمان رد می شود یک وقت آتش بزنیم. بهتر است بگذاریم همان زیر له بشوند. ما فقط مجازیم با شعارهای متعادل غیر سبزها را سبز کنیم. آن هم به شرط این که حتی همان شعارهای متعادل اولا شعارهای متین و محترمانه باشد، ثانیاً مورد پذیرش همه سبزها و رهبران جنبش سبز باشد، ثالثاً به مخالفان بهانه ندهد. واضح است که می‌خواهد بگوید مبادا شعار مرگ بر دیکتاتور بدهید. خب یک باره بگو به راهپیمایی نرویم و خلاصمان کن. مگر خامنه‌ای چیزی جز این می‌خواهد؟ آخر تا اینجا که همه‌اش ما را در این راهپیمایی به سیاهی لشکر رژیم تبدیل کردی. راستی بچه ها، چطور است که کفش و کلاه غیر متمایز به پا و بر سر نموده سری به چنین راهپیمایی بزنیم و قربان عمه‌مان بشویم و برگردیم؟ البته به نحو کاملا متعادل و طوری که مورد قبول همه سبزها و رهبران جنبش سبز باشد. در مقابل یک نسخه پیام تشکر خامنه‌ای درباره حضور 10 میلیونی خود به دست می‌آوریم تا به قول ولی فقیه برای همیشه از معاندان و فریب خوردگان داخلی بپرهیزیم، از خواب غفلت بیدار شویم و به صراط مستقیم ولایت بازگردیم. واقعاً که نه مجتبی و نه محمود به این خوبی نمی توانستند ارشاد کنند و راهنمودهای کلیدی برای راهپیمایی 22 بهمن بنویسند. در روز 13 بهمن باند غالب شعارهای حامیان موسوی را هم به مجاهدین نسبت داد و نوشت: پلاکارت ها و شعارها و عربده ها با خودکار سبز منافقین نگاشته می شود. هدف باند غالب واضح است: پرتاب کردن موسوی به عقب در تهران و سرکوب مجاهدین در اشرف. ما البته در هر دو وجه خلاف این را می‌خواستیم و باز هم می‌خواهیم. حالا بگویید ببینیم آن راهنمودهای کلیدی برای راهپیمایی 22 بهمن با خودکار سبز چه کسی جز خامنه‌ای نوشته شده است؟ این پرونده سازی ها یک تمامیت و یک کل به هم پیوسته و هدایت شده از سوی بیت العنکبوت ولی فقیه ارتجاع و رئیس جمهوران ولایت بود که بیدریغ پول نفت را که قرار بود به سفره‌های ملت ایران بازگردانند، همراه با خود نفت به آن سوی جهان سرازیر کردند تا شاید با آن مجاهدین و مقاومت ایران را بسوزانند و خاکستر کنند. در زمان خاتمی می گفتند بمباران و موشکباران و کوبیدن مجاهدین ثواب دارد و اصلاحات را تقویت می کند. در 2 سال اخیر با خودکار سبز خامنه‌ای که از آستین آخوند مصلحی بیرون می آید می نویسند که بسته شدن پرونده های مجاهدین و خارج شدن آنها از لیست تروریستی آمریکا جنبش سبز را تضعیف می کند. و ما هنوز هم نفهمیدیم که یک گروهک ناچیز تروریستی، سکتاریستی، بعثی، صهیونیستی، امپریالیستی و سوسیال امپریالیستی که به گفته عظما و مقلدان و امداد رسانان غیبی او هیچ پایه اجتماعی در داخل ایران هم ندارد، چرا باید اینقدر مشغله ذهنی و عینی او و همریشان و همریشه های او باشد؟ چرا باید اینقدر اسباب ترس و وحشت باشد؟ چرا باید میلیاردها دلار علیه آن خرج کرد و آن را معیار و ملاک سنجش دوست از دشمن در ایران و عراق و منطقه و در سطح جهان قرار داد؟ خرازی وزیر خارجه آخوند خاتمی در کرسی وزارت لدالورود قراردادهای عظیم نفتی را به کمپانی‌های آمریکایی پیشنهاد کرد. همان قراردادهای میلیارد دلاری که در حال حاضر نصیب کمپانی‌های اروپایی می شود.